the stupidest thing a teacher has tried to tell your child? Story 1. When my brother was in grade 4, both of his teachers insisted that Mexico was in South America and laughed at him for saying otherwise. When he brought in articles about NAFTA that my mom printed out for him to prove them wrong, they said, "Anyone can say anything on the internet." Edit. Everyone keeps saying you can say anything on the internet. This was before Wikipedia, and I was referring to online newspaper articles and publications from NAFTA itself. Story 2. Science teacher told my 7th grader that the phases of the moon were due to the rotation of the moon. When challenged by my daughter, she claimed that the moon looks the same on both sides. Therefore, we see the whole moon, one identical side at a time. My daughter is sent home with a note to us, her parents, declaring her impertinent, unruly, and a disruption in the classroom, precipitating a parent-teacher vice principal conference. Said science teacher repeats her position in front of the vice principal that the moon rotates with respect to the Earth and is identical on both its hemispheres, hence the phases of the moon as seen from Earth. Vice principal asks teacher to repeat, which she does, clearly spelling out the geometry and inevitable consequence of her moon rotation with identical hemispheres theory. Vice principal excuses us parents and our child to wait outside, my daughter facepalming uncontrollably at this point. We wait a few minutes and witness the teacher leave, turning lovely shades of red and purple. The vice principal appears and shared with us that she wished my daughter had chosen a less confrontational mode to expose the woman for the idiot she was. Just how she might have done so was not shared with us. Turns out the science teacher was in reality a home economics instructor pressed into duty as a science teacher to make up for a shortfall of trained science educators in our district. It was then U.S. parents' turn to facepalm. Story 3 had a teacher tell me that a gallon was 64 OZ. I told her it was twice that. A security guard came to the door to drop off mail or something, and she asked him. He said, 128 OZ, and the teacher ran from the room sobbing, right past the very confused guard. Edit. Same woman told me that Japan is a communist nation. Story 4. We were talking about medical suicide, as my teacher put it, in my history class, and when I said euthanasia in my presentation, my history teacher turned to me and said, "We're not talking about kids in Asia, Dana. You clearly didn't understand the assignment." Story 5. Not my child, but my father was once told by a high school teacher that the Japanese kamikaze pilots all performed seppuku on themselves right before their planes hit ships in Pearl Harbor. Story 6. Son's 3rd grade assignment. Draw your dream house. He got an F because his dream house was unrealistic. He failed another student choice of topic assignment he did on dinosaurs because dinosaurs weren't real as they weren't in the Bible. He got detention when he told her neither were air conditioners. Public school, early 90s in rural Texas. Story 7. I've told this story a dozen times, but I don't care. In 11th grade, I was reading Macbeth like everyone else does. One thing most high school English teachers like to do is pretend they're interdisciplinary and start teaching the history surrounding their books. They're almost always bad at it. Now me, the history nerd that I was, resented it. However, I usually was able to sit through their attempts at teaching the info. However, during my Macbeth unit, I simply couldn't. So we sit down in class for the predictable lesson plan when my teacher starts up with, Macbeth is set in the 17th century Scotland. Now for those of you who know your history, that should be enough for you. For those of you that don't, she's completely and utterly wrong. Macbeth was written in 17th century, not set. It was set in the 11th century. So me being the good student that I was, kept quiet. I didn't want to embarrass her. So I waited. At the end of class, after everyone had left, I went up to her and said quietly, Mrs. Moron, I just wanted to let you know that you were wrong about the date. Macbeth isn't set in the 17th century. It's probably the 11th or 12th century. I wasn't exactly sure, but I knew enough about British history to know that that was probably the time period it was from. Now, instead of saying, "Oh, okay, thanks," she goes, "Oh no, see, Shakespeare was writing the Macbeth story as an alternate history set in the 17th century. So I just nodded my head and said, "Oh, okay," and left. But, oh no, I wasn't done. I went home and got on the vast swath of information that is the internet. I quickly got enough proof, and even went so far as to get info from Cliff Notes, which backed me up. The version we were reading was published by Cliff Notes. I know. So confident in my success, I approached her before class and said, "Mrs. Moron, I did some research and you're wrong. Shakespeare was definitely not writing the story set in the 17th century, as that was when he was writing it." She looked at me and without missing a beat said, "Hegs 94, you clearly have a personal problem with me. If you want, we can talk about this after class in the office. I just shook my head and said, "No, I have no personal issues with you. It's just you are teaching false information." To top it all off, we eventually had a test where one of the questions was, what was the setting of Macbeth? And the only option that included Scotland was 17th century Scotland. That chick. TLDR. Dumb English teacher doesn't understand history. Story 8. My little brother had a science teacher who at first refused to teach the Big Bang. After a few angry calls from parents, she was forced to. She told the entire class that the Big Bang was when two meteorites slammed into each other, and there was a big banging sound. There was so little science in that I nearly threw up. Not only did she not know about the Big Bang, she didn't know that a meteorite is an object that has struck Earth, and that space cannot transmit sound as it is a vacuum. Sort of things you hope a science teacher knows. Edit. Holy so much karma. I'm sending this to my brother. Story 9. Not my child but me. My science teacher told me that we'd all die in 50 years when the coal supply ran out. Cue me having a mad panic and bawling my eyes out until my dad told me otherwise. Story 10. Teacher here. You'd be surprised by the miscommunication that has taken place from me to student to parent. Have you ever played Whisper Down the Lane? Sometimes I'll do a lesson. 26 kids will not all understand it the same way. Surely one or two has gone home and told their parents about some bat-insane thing they think they heard me say. Likewise, you should hear what your kids say about you. I've always taken it with a grain of salt. Moral of the story. Sometimes youngsters misunderstand a lesson, lecture, concept, example, activity. Disclaimer. Teachers are humans, and I'm sure some of the that has been posted is 100% true. Story 11. The kids in my son's class had to pick a state to do a report on. One of the kids picked Hawaii. The teacher told him he had to pick another one because Hawaii isn't a state. Story 12. My sister's third grade teacher thought that a baker's dozen was 11, since the baker ate one. Edited to add, a baker's dozen is 13. I can't tell if a lot of you commenting didn't catch that the teacher was straight up wrong versus just telling a funny story for a true fact. Story 13. A health teacher told us that HIV could go through condoms. I stood up and told her that was a lie, and she sent me to the office. Edit. Because it keeps being brought up. The teacher wasn't talking about sheepskin. She explained that condoms are made from molds of a penis, but because the skin of a penis has small holes, i.e., cells, the HIV could seep through while we're much larger and we're blocked. That is the thought process of an idiot woman teaching teenagers to this day. Story 14. Somewhat on topic. Back when I was in second grade, my parents had just gotten me this awesome messenger bag that had a big sailboat on it. I was super excited and showed my teacher. We needed to have our names somewhere on our backpacks and supplies, usually written on the tags inside, but this bag didn't have any tags. So instead, my teacher proceeded to write my name with a permanent marker all over the front of my bag. She then wrote a letter to my parents saying my school bag was too small and I needed a larger one. I was extremely sad, and my parents pissed off. Story 15. My home ec teacher tried to convince us that honey was very bad and to always eat white processed sugar. Also, fresh cow's milk and fresh eggs are poisonous until processed. After growing up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere and eating all three no-nos all my life, she called me a liar and said, I should have been dead a long time ago. Story 16. When I was in one of the shittiest countries in the world, Kyrgyzstan, I was focusing on learning English during my Kyrgyz language class, and the teacher told me to focus on his language because more people spoke that language than English all over the world. To this day, my mother and I laugh about it. Story 17. Too bad I showed up late to this party. My mentor teacher told his group of grade 7s that doctors in Canada will preform post-birth abortions. The doctor delivers the baby, then puts it in a closet and leaves it until it dies. Then he went on to say that the kids need to pray for the women who would choose such a thing because they are ill. Oh, and he gave some crazy high statistic like 91% of women who get abortions regret it and feel lost for the remainder of their lives. Story 18. Me. I am going to publish this essay on my FTP server so I can download it later. School librarian. You are going to do what? Me. I am going to put this on the internet. School librarian. You can't just put stuff on the internet. Story 19. Something someone tried to teach me when I was about 7-9. I went to Sunday school every week. My family wasn't religious. I just imagined it was a way for me to socialize when I was young living in a small town. And the last time I went, I was sitting and drawing a robot, and the woman that ran the place came over to me and started telling me about Jesus. I told her I didn't really think he was real because Santa wasn't and no one ever saw him either. And then she told me that if I didn't believe in Jesus, he would come to me in my sleep and kill me, then send me to, so I should believe in him or something bad would happen to me. I was pretty terrified because she said it in a way that was really threatening, so I sat quietly for the rest of the day, and when my grandparents picked me up, I asked them if Jesus would kill me and send me to... They asked why I would ask something like that. I told them, and my grandfather told my gran to take me out to the car. I later found out that he yelled at the woman and asked her how she could say something like that to a child. Story 20. This will probably get buried, but a kid in my class asked my third grade teacher why there were black people. She responded, "God only made white people, but over the years some people changed colors after being exposed to the sun in different areas, like Africa." Story 21. Had a substitute teacher that told the class that AIDS would be airborne in the next 3 years. He got mad at me when I said, "Really?" Because no, it isn't. Story 22. In 2004, back when I was in the 6th grade, we had a geography quiz. One of the questions was who Hong Kong belonged to. United Kingdom and China were both answer choices. I answered China and got it wrong, so I asked my teacher about it. She told me that although Hong Kong was technically now part of China, the textbook, which was printed in 1996, said it was still part of the UK. Therefore, she wouldn't correct my quiz. Why would you put a question like that in a quiz knowing the situation? Story 23-2 from my own childhood spring immediately to mind. The first was in 4th grade, covering taxonomy in science class. My teacher taught us that fungi are leafless, rootless, non-green plants. I knew this was wrong, that fungi are their own classification and not remotely related to the plant kingdom. It took a call from my dad, a botany professor at the local college, to convince her otherwise. She gave a completely half-assed apology in class. Sudanveri's parents have fields of expertise different from mine, so Sudanveri might know different things. No mention of what the fact in contention actually was, and looking back on it now, I'm willing to bet vast sums of money that she immediately went back to teaching that fungi are plants the next year. The second was in 6th grade, also during science time. My teacher told us that those glow-in-the-dark necklaces you get at fairs and whatnot are radioactive. The concept of chemical luminescence apparently sailed right over her head. Edit. Yes, light is absolutely a form of radiation. However, this teacher was claiming that the radiation was the harmful type and would cause cancer. She compared it to handling something like radium or plutonium. Apologies for not making it clear. We'll count the massive number of orange reds informing me of the nature of light as my lesson to specify properly in the future. Carry on. Story 24. My 6th grade teacher asked the class for an example of an interesting animal. I said piranha. She said, "No, fish aren't animals." That's when I realized she was a complete idiot. Story 25. Accounting teacher in high school told the class that women belonged barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. He was fired that week. I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but he is Pentecostal. Mr. Richard Yu. Story 26. When my son was in grade 4, his teacher explained that the best way to commit suicide was to run a pipe from the exhaust into the back window and then sit in the thing inside a closed garage. Yeah, it was that specific. He got fired. Story 27. I don't have kids, thank God. I'm 19. But I had a chemistry teacher tell us the world would end due to a predicted solar flare in 2013 that would kill all electronics and cause riots worldwide. This guy was 78 and had been teaching for a decade. He told us this in 2008. Story 28. My son was in kindergarten and had an assessment test to determine if he was prepared to continue. I came in afterward for the review. The teachers commented that he did very well, but he missed a question. What's your favorite number? Apparently, he answered infinity and explained clearly why. Yeah, they were looking for a simpler answer like 5. When I told them that in mathematics, it's considered a number, they said it was too high a concept for a child to understand and therefore wrong. Story 29. When I was 9 years old, my parents divorced, and my new elementary school had a ridiculous in-house therapist. His methods included coloring a blank chalk outline photo in different colors to show where I felt my emotions. Even as a child, I was irritated. Also, he suggested I kick the wall if I'm ever angry, because the wall doesn't feel pain. I did so, and smashed a 13x10 hole through the drywall in my bedroom. Story 30. High school science teacher said Katrina was a twister. I raised my hand and said it was a hurricane. Instead of admitting she made a mistake, she continued to defend her original statement. I continued to explain to the class what the differences were, and that in fact Katrina was a hurricane, with a major fact being it was named, "We don't go around naming tornadoes, do we?" The teacher cried. When I was younger, I guess. Story 31. My co-worker was told by her son's kindergarten teacher that if she fed him fruit while he had a flu, he'd develop an allergy to the fruit. I nearly pissed myself laughing. Story 32. Well, I had a teacher tell me it was my fault my bus came a few minutes later than everyone else's, and therefore it was my fault I failed penmanship. Why did you start before we were there? Why didn't you tell me I was far behind? And why did you fail me without ever telling me I was doing badly? 15 years later, I'm still angry about it. It inspires me to actually try to be a good teacher. Story 33. My year, UK school year, I was 14 yo. Geography. Teacher insisted that Havana was in Mexico. I had been to Cuba not 1 year before, yet she insisted she was right. She called me to find Havana on the map, and find it I did, chilling there on Cuba's western tip, on the massive map of the world on the wall next to her desk. Okay, sit down now, was her response. I lost quite a bit of respect for teachers that day, and it was from that point I truly began questioning what people presented to me as fact. If she was wrong about that, I thought, what other bullshit has she been passing off as fact? Story 34. My 6th grade teacher hated me. He called my parents in for a meeting and told them I was mentally retarded and wouldn't finish high school. He died of a heart attack. I win. Story 35. This happened to me rather than my kids. We had a substitute in our kindergarten class who went on a rant about how the Holocaust wasn't real and never happened. My best friend was also in my class, and she lost her grandparents in the Holocaust. We went home and told our mothers, who showed up together the next morning, and by the end of that day, that woman wasn't allowed to substitute in that district anymore. Story 36. Okay, this one really pissed me off. In my freshman year of high school, we were studying U.S. history for about the 7th time, and we were talking about the desegregation of Little Rock High School, AR. We had to do some kind of group work in which we had to write down facts of some sort about the incident. I talked about how President Eisenhower had to send a bit over 1,000 U.S. Army troops from the 101st Airborne to protect the incoming African-American students. The student teacher, basically just the teachers, was walking by and just laughed at my comment. He hated me. I looked at him with a strong sense of confusion, thinking that maybe I got my numbers wrong. And he said, "You really think that the 101st Airborne would go to Little Rock High School to protect it? What do you think they did? Flew all their fighters to the high school to protect it? Had overhead attacks on the protesters? Come on, snipe skier, be rational here." I tried describing to the student teacher that the 101st Airborne isn't the Air Force, and that the troops were definitely from that section of the military. But once again he laughed at me. Thankfully we had computers in class, so I looked it up, showed him the information, and still thought I was wrong. He still made fun of me for thinking that. You know what? I'm going to send him an email now that I'm gone from that school. Edit. Wrong shorthand for Arkansas. Whoops. Story 37. In 3rd grade, our history teacher started talking about Benjamin Franklin, basically the usual stuff that everyone knows. But then she says how great of a president he was. Well, I'm in 3rd grade and I know that's not right. I raise my hand and I tell her that Benjamin Franklin was never a president. The class disagrees with me and so does the teacher, but I hold my ground and she looks in her book of presidents and sure enough, I'm right. Most satisfying moment of my life. Story 38. When I was in the 7th grade, my teacher failed me on a report that stated, Christopher Columbus did not discover the Americas. He landed in the West Indies and the Caribbean islands. He also was not the first European explorer to eventually visit the Americas. At least one previous explorer, Leif Erikson, preceded him. The teacher stated that I was blatantly making things up to hype my sense of self-importance. I don't believe I had ever been so angry in my life. Story 39. My cousin's teacher asked the class, of very young children, to name colors of apples. She assigned green. The teacher said, I mean ripe apples. She said, yay green, my mom buys green apples. And the teacher made her look like an idiot in class. She got home and told her mom about it, and my aunt promptly purchased a Granny Smith apple for each student in the class and came with her to school the next day. Story 40. I've had Muslim friends. This isn't a joke. These people grew up in a Muslim country. Say that it's okay if you can only get a hold of a condom once in a while, because you can wash it and turn it inside out. The answer to your question is nothing. That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen someone learn. Story 41. Well, my kid isn't born yet, 6 weeks to go. But when I was in high school, my chemistry teacher told me that you can only see atoms in Sweden. I got him fired a week later. Edit. This was not the only incidence of idiocy that got him fired. He was an awful teacher, spent most of his time talking about politics in Africa, and a few times before I dropped the class, we had to write essays off of articles in a newspaper that he was mentioned in. Everyone in the class was like, yay man, easy A. I was the only one there who was infuriated that my science class was not being taken seriously. It was probably the only subject in school I even cared remotely about. He's not the only teacher I got fired either. One of my history teachers that same year got the axe thanks to me as well, though that was more because she was a verbally abusive thundercunt than anything else, though she also didn't know her subject either. Edit 2. I guess some people want to know a little more. I'll try to shed a little bit of light on the situation. So to start with, he had recently immigrated to the States from Africa, and I was pretty excited because A, I've never had a teacher who spoke Swahili, so I was excited simply because it could have been a cool exposure to a new language, people, and B, science. So jumping right off of that, he hands us a printout of an article detailing a protest that had gone on in his home country, and he was one of the protesters in the photo related to the article. If I remember right, which I might not, it was some 12 years ago, he had organized the protest and he had been interviewed. After we'd received the article that fed his megalomania, he asked us to read it and write a short essay about him, not his cause, that took most of the class. Now, by this point, every student knew immediately this guy had no idea what he was doing. They pounced on the opportunity to just around in class and only barely write the essay. Meanwhile, I'm annoyed I'm not learning how to build a nuclear bomb or make explode by throwing dust at it. I do my work, turn it in and whatnot. The next few days, he bumbled through lectures. Sometimes I would correct him, like when he got neutrons, protons, and electrons wrong. He briefly tried to talk about cells, and he couldn't tell a nucleus from mitochondria until I directed him to a page in the book that had a diagram of a cell. He rarely used the textbook that was part of the curriculum, and I'm all for teaching outside what is expected so long as it's relevant, but it never was. There were a couple more papers we had to write that were about him, his life, what he did in X country. I don't remember where he was from exactly. Meanwhile, every day I went to class, the students pretty much listened to him for 5 minutes and then just did whatever asinine things they wanted. He simply kept talking while everyone in the class was doing their own thing. The penis game would be played and he'd say nothing because he didn't know what the word penis meant. He only reacted because people were yelling in his class. This goes on for a couple weeks. He says you can only see atoms in Sweden. I finally get fed up with my time being wasted and went to the administration and told them what was going on in the class and that I wanted out. They took me out of the class. I went to TA for Spanish since it's my first language. About a week later, I find out from another person who was in the class that he'd been fired and they had a new teacher. If this had been another class like math, English lit, home ec, I wouldn't have cared as much if at all, but I've always held science in high esteem. I was the kid who asked for microscopes and telescopes for Christmas. About the verbally abusive thunder cunt. She was a real piece of work. She was older, from Chicago, smoked 2 to 3 packs a day, and at first was really cool. She cursed and didn't really censor herself too much, and as a teen with the mouth of a sailor, it was cool. We would chat if I ran into her outside of class in the halls or something. She didn't really bother giving out seating arrangements, so myself and 3 other friends sat together. So, because we were getting comfortable with her lax attitude, we started to be a bit disruptive. Not really more so than other students, but we were sitting closer to the front and I'd shot the with her after class sometimes. So about a couple weeks into class, she starts to get really fed up with us. Since she knew me well enough, she zeroed in on me and my friends, and one day, my friends and I were chatting amongst ourselves in hushed tones during her lecture, and she turned around and unleashed a flurry of vulgarity akin to Joe Pesci losing it in Casino. Naturally, we slinked down and shut the immediately. We were on our best behavior for a while, but the thing is, anytime something happened in class that wasn't caused by us, she would turn around and immediately attack us and blame everything on us. And God forbid we stood up for ourselves and said, "That wasn't us. Shut the up. I don't want to hear that. Just shut up and listen. Do your work." She gave us lower grades than we earned, just because she could and was feeling spiteful. A few times she was lecturing she'd get some things wrong, but I didn't bother correcting her. It wasn't anything major anyway. After dealing with her for a while, maybe, week or two, I took it up with the administration. We have a meeting where all 4 of us were brought in. She tried to tell her side of the story, but when one of us protested, I can't remember who, she nearly lost her again. That said, she also got canned. They gave her till the end of the quarter, but after that she was gone. Saw her crying in the parking lot during that time period. Back then I didn't care at all. Now that I'm typing it out, I do feel bad. But someone with that little control over their temper has no business teaching high school. So, I hope that was entertaining enough for the hive mind. Too tired to write it in much of a fun fashion. I do want to say thanks to everyone congratulating me on the baby. Internet love. Feels Goodman. JPG, good night. Story 42. Health and career class tried to say that meth wasn't bad. They related it to coffee, then said it was okay to try at parties. Edit. To the people saying meth isn't bad, this was in the scenario where there are a bunch of teenagers trying to smoke it at a party. This isn't some prescription version. Story 43. I had one teacher who was crazy. He constantly talked about nanobots. We'd have hour-long discussions about freaking nanobots. This was a pre-calc class. His whole point was that they were going to be part of the future, and he even brought in an article one day and put it on the overhead. That's right. I got homework over nanobots. Facehoof. Edit. The point is that he basically taught us nothing about pre-calc. Story 44. Apparently, someone at my old elementary school was fond of making up dumb rules. One day I was walking across the playground and absent-mindedly kicked a red ball. It bounced a few feet. Immediately, I hear a whistle blow, and a yard duty walked up to me and told me that I was not supposed to kick the red and that I would have to sit out the rest of recess. There were red and yellow, identical except for the color. You were only supposed to bounce the red and kick the yellow ones. This was a rule I was never informed of. I angrily sat out the rest of recess on a bench because of that bull rule. I was a good kid, never even got a pink slip or went to the principal. It has to still be one of the most unfair things that has ever happened to me. This was one of the same yard duties that was constantly surrounded by little girls talking the whole recess and not noticing when a kid got beat up. Yet it was instantly noticed when I kicked a red ball. I'll be 80 and still resent that. Story 45. My junior high science teacher along with my entire class were convinced that while skydiving, when you pull the chute, you actually go up. Like the parachute somehow creates lift, almost like a bungee cord. I tried to tell them that it just appears that way because the person filming doesn't pull their chute at the same time and therefore keeps falling at terminal while the parachuter's velocity is significantly reduced. Totally felt like I was on crazy pills. The whole class was yelling at me. We had to take it to a high school physics teacher resolve the argument. Story 46. I got in a large argument in 7th grade because my teacher wrote a test, with a question being, how many weeks are in a year? He said the answer was 48. Still get angry that I got that wrong. Story 47. I had a teacher who told my parents, in a parent-teacher conference, that some kids just become Walmart greeters, basically saying I am stupid as. I now have a master's degree and just sold my first business. Story 48. My brother is autistic and was in special education for all of his schooling. He had several teachers in a row that were really into using comic strips for creative writing. Draw a picture, write dialogue in a speech bubble, and voila, Insta story. My brother liked it, but after seeing me writing prose one summer, I think he was in 7th grade and I was in 9th, he decided he wanted to write like me. So over the course of the summer, he and I together wrote about 50 pages of a story by hand. That should be impressive to any teacher of a 7th grader, let alone a special ed teacher. When my mom and brother went to meet his new teacher for the fall, my mom proudly told the teacher of what my brother had accomplished. The teacher turned to my brother and, well, that's nice, but you'll get to go back to writing comic strips this year. Won't that be so much easier? My mom and that teacher never got along. Her preference for easier extended far beyond writing, and she hardly challenged my brother at all that year. Story 49. In middle school, I had an ed teacher who told all the girls in 8th grade that kissing always leads to I've kissed way more people in my life than I've had with. Story 50. When I was in the 5th grade, my teacher had it the out for me. At the time, I was a fast-growing boy and was 5'9", making me about eye level with him. Well, we had these little bullshit desks which were made for someone half my size, so if I were to sit normally, the desk would be 3 inches off of the ground. I would get bitched at because of this, and then further bitched at when I put my feet out in front of my desk to keep it on the ground. I wore a size 13 shoe then. If he was having a bad day, I'd get a detention because of that bullshit and have to stay after class for 30 minutes and clean chalkboards, wash desks, etc. What really got me, though, was when we had one of those reading week things, where every day had something like an hour dedicated to reading a book. Any book. I chose A Clear and Present Danger, which was snatched off my desk and brought, with me in tow, to the principal's office. My teacher accused me of trying to show off by reading something not written by R.L. Stine, and went as far as to insinuate that I didn't even know what I was reading. My parents were called in, everyone met in the classroom, and my mother, who was an English teacher for 2 decades, who also got me reading 4 or 5 grade levels ahead, had me rattle off the entire plotline of The Hunt for Red October. The teacher and principal were both dumbfounded. Later, he made the class give a book report about our chosen book. I received a C. The school board modified his findings. TLDR. Every book is a children's book if the kid can read. Story 51. When I was in elementary school, a PE coach insisted that deoxygenated blood was blue. I tried to tell him otherwise. Blood is dark red when it's drawn from a syringe, etc. But he didn't listen. I ended up asking my doctor, who burst out laughing and said something to the lines of, "And that is why he is the PE coach, not your doctor." Story 52. I don't remember the grade. It was something like 1st grade, though. Teach told us that America has never lost a war. Now, being this was 1st grade, and I realize now I'd have OCD my entire life. I wasn't interested in war or history. I was interested in science and was secretly looking through my science text you would keep in your desk, and it was just sort of one of those, okay, we never lose, yay America, moments we would always have. Well, this kid pipes up and asks about Vietnam. We are all told we won Vietnam and after winning left. I find out later this kid's father is a vet who served in Vietnam. He insists we didn't leave after winning, but his father says we were losing and pulled out. So teacher says, well, I'm the teacher, and I know more than your father. And this kid responds, but he fought in that war. I heard, well then he probably wasn't really paying attention because America has never and will never lose a war. And that is when something clicked inside my brain and I thought, adults are stupid. Squirrels are awesome. I want to be a scientist when I grow up. Story 53. I was born in France. I moved here when I was 8 and spoke no English. Only knew yes, no, and thank you. I went to a bilingual school for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You learn pretty quickly at that age. My 5th grade teacher was Latin. Don't remember what country she was from, but deaf Spanish as a first language. Heavy accent. We were doing grammar one day and she asked me what part of a speech a certain word was. I said it's a verb. Her response? No, it's a verb. I argued with her that for 2 years I'd been taught that it's verb, not verb. She insisted that it was verb and made me say verb the rest of the year. The next year I started middle school at a regular school. Same Convo W new teacher, and I say it's a verb. Of course everyone, including the teacher, laughed at me. I was like, I knew it. Idiot teacher.